Well, guys, we're all the way to lesson 50. Can you guess maybe what this lesson is about? Maybe about bathtubs? That's kind of a strange lesson, isn't it? Bathtubs are kind of important though, especially back in the time of the Roman Empire, because they definitely loved bathtubs. This bathtub I use for my grandkids, and I have their toys there because they love taking baths at my house, especially my littlest one who's 4 years old. Well, anyway, let's talk about Bath, England. Well, we were at the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire was huge during the time of Caesar Augustus. Remember Caesar Augustus, Octavius? Well, during that time it expanded. Actually, before that, Julius Caesar had actually come and tried to conquer England, but didn't at that time. In fact, Rome didn't conquer England until 43 AD under the reign of Emperor Claudius. And then Rome came in and established many towns and many roads in England. It's kind of weird because England is an island, and so they would have to go across by boat to get to England. But Rome, they simply seemed to like the country of England. They established a town called Londinium. Londinium was the Roman name. It was on the Thames River, and in 50 AD it was a little city, but then it started to grow into this big trading center, and later on its name would be changed to London, England. You might have heard of that name. And then there was the Roman outpost that was in 70 AD. And this outpost they put for the Roman soldiers could go and stay there up there because England was far away, but they'd have to guard England there. So anyway, the Roman outpost was called Diva Victrix, and that's there. Even today, you have the ruins of that Roman outpost, and that's like a long, long time ago. Let's just say that. And then the Romans built a walls around their cities that they went in. So they were commonly known for their roads and their walls and their cities. The Emperor Hadrian, which was one of the next Roman emperors, visited Britain in 122 AD. And he ordered a wall to mark the northern boundary of Rome up there in England. And to prevent the Scottish people to come in. The Scots were trying to come in and attack, so he built this wall. And the wall was 73 miles long, so it was a major wall. It was called Hadrian's Wall. So you can remember in England about Hadrian's Wall. And it went coast to coast. It had many towers and gates and forts along the way, and trenches. They built big trenches there and moats so that it wouldn't be easy crawling over the wall. So it was mainly for protection, kind of like the Wall of China, but the Wall of China was much greater, much bigger. Well, we wanted to talk about the springs because the Romans really, really liked the hot springs. Have you ever been to hot springs? They're kind of fun, aren't they, to go to? They're water coming right out of the water, and you're sitting in these springs, and you just feel like, wow, this is really good to my skin. Well, let's talk about water coming. Well, how do we get water? Do you know? Well, we just turn on the faucet, don't we? Oh no, but how do we get it? How do they get it to the faucet? Well, a lot of times water comes from wells, and so you have to drill or dig a well until you come to water. And you'll find that even in Bible times, they were digging wells. Well, a well is not like a spring, because a spring just bubbles out. And when the spring bubbles out, you find it and you see this water coming out just naturally on its own. But then there's the hot spring. The hot spring, how does the water get hot? Well, a lot of times the water travels way underground and it comes in contact with something called magma. Can you say magma? Well, anyway, the hot springs with the magma underneath the water gets all hot. By the time it comes out, it's at different temperatures, sometimes just barely warm springs and sometimes very hot springs. And sometimes it would squirt out at certain times, like a geyser. Have you ever been to Old Faithful in Lake Yellowstone? I have. That's a great example of a geyser. Well, we're going to talk about these special hot springs here. And these hot springs were north of the Mendip Hills in England. Can you say Mendip Hills? Kind of a strange name. Well, the Romans conquered England and they discovered these hot springs. And they called this area, this whole town, Bath. You know why? Because the Romans loved their baths. Remember, even the centurions, they would come in and try to build baths in the area of their city. So they'd be public, like public baths. But they also, in Rome, they even started having private baths. Especially the wealthy would have private baths in their house, which was kind of unique. We're talking about, a couple thousand years ago, So, but let's talk about the Mendip Hills there. They were a limestone ridge, a big mountain that went up. And so the wells would dip down, come down and seep way down into the ground, 14,000 feet beneath the Mendip Hills. And that way they knew where was the heat coming from. It had to be coming almost from the core of the earth, from the magma, right? So they emerged at Bath, at the city of Bath in England, with 3 springs. The first spring was the main spring, and it was a constant 115 degrees, which is a little bit hot, You think if you got into water, it'd be a little bit warm, maybe a little bit too hot. I don't know, for some of us, maybe me. But anyway, it would produce 250,000 gallons every 4th day, and it would hardly ever change. So every 4th day it would produce it over years and years and years, the same amount. That's pretty cool. How God has created, and as God has created these areas, and how can you imagine how every single year the same amount of water goes through there. And then they had 2 other springs in nearby towns too, but they had different amounts at different times, but they still were very consistent. Well, let's talk about the Roman bath. Okay, the Roman bath. Okay, there's a lot of others that had baths before. We know Babylon had baths, and so did the Greece, and so did the Hittites. So baths go back a long time ago. And Romans built many bathrooms across the whole empire, wherever they went. And the hot springs there, though, they loved because they thought that the hot springs would help their ailments. If they had arthritis or they had some problems with their skin, they thought we could just go in. There was many legends, ones in your book by a guy, a king that had leprosy, and he saw some of the pigs going in that had leprosy, which I didn't really know pigs get leprosy, but so he went into the hot springs there and he came out and he was clean. Now that's just a legend, I know, especially when you think about pigs having leprosy. But anyway, there was a lot of legends about it. So it started bringing people from Rome, not just the Roman centurions and the Roman soldiers, but other people too, because they wanted to take in the waters and relax and clean and get healed and have healing. It actually had lots of minerals and they thought minerals were good for your body. And maybe they are even today for your skin. So they put the minerals of the mud or the minerals on them as they would sit in the baths. They were at the bath there. There was a lot of sulfate in it. Sulfur kind of smells a little bit, so I don't like to sit in a area of water with sulfur in it. But I guess they didn't mind that. And then calcium chloride and sodium chloride are good for your skin too, and many other minerals. And many people, you know what they did? They drank their bath water too. Now, I don't know if that really helped them, but they thought the minerals and everything were good enough for their skin. It'd be good enough to drink. So they did. They drank their bath water. So, and going on, let's talk about, because you can imagine how would they pump this around into the big bath, because they made a huge, like a bathing pool. So the Roman engineers had to install pipes and channel it through, and they would channel it through into an area that they want, and then they'd build this big, huge pool that was made of lead, which now they would never do a pool with lead, but that's what they did it back then. And any surplus water would flow into the Avon River, down about a 4th mile away. So they would get rid, so it wouldn't overflow. That's how the city of Bath went. Now let's talk about the experience. How did they take a bath there? Well, they didn't just jump in the bathtub and scrub up and jump out. They didn't get in the bathtub and play with their toys, you know. No, they didn't do that kind of stuff. But what they would do, they built one room where they would undress. And they would undress, you know, in that room. The next room, they would exercise for a while, which is kind of weird, you know. But they would come and they'd exercise before they got in. And then the next, they would get into the lukewarm water. So they had one area that was lukewarm water called the tepidarium. Tepid means tepid water, means lukewarm water. And then they get into the next water area, which would be the hottest water. And it was called the caldarium. Cauldron means hot, you know, so cauldron, the hottest water. So they'd go with the tepid water and then the cauldron water. and then they would get out and they'd have their skin all oiled and they'd scrape their skin a bit to get some of the excess skin out. And then they go into the cold water that was called the frigidarium. Refrigerator's pretty cold. That's how you can remember that area. So they go into that area in the cold water. And then a lot of times in certain areas, especially in Bath, they would have saunas where they would go in to these hot areas with the hot rocks and everything and have the sauna. And they'd sit in the sauna for a while and then have a final plunge into the cold water. What an experience. So they went from, you know, exercising to going into the lukewarm water, into the hottest water, and then getting oiled, then going back into the frigid water, then back into the sauna and cold water. They thought that was like a special experience, almost like a religious experience for them to do. But they came from all over Rome to go to this area. Well, prior to the Roman coming there, and prior to the Roman Empire, you know, taking over England, Bath was sacred to some of the peoples there. But there were 27 different tribes, and they all had different gods. And one of the gods was Sulis, and they named it Aqua Sulis. So they knew about that area of Bath with those springs there, those hot springs, and probably used it there then even. But even today, that area is pretty cool to go and see in England. And now you can see some of the ruins of the Roman Empire, even in England. That's how big the Roman Empire was. And of course, they loved their baths. So, but when I think about all this, I think about water, and I think about the living water. You guys know, I hand out Gospels John, the living water, and that Jesus is that living water. When I think of water rushing, you know, I think of just happiness. It makes me joy. You know, a waterfall, just you look at it, you see all these droplets just falling down, just and amazingly and coming together. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. You know, God's creation is beautiful. But then Jesus said he wants to give us living water. In fact, he said, everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks of the water I give him shall never thirst. But the water that I will give him will become in him a well of water springing up to eternal life. Don't you love that? You know, you guys ever want one of these to give out? It's the Gospel of John. And he said, oh, it's living water springing up to eternal life. That's kind of just a great picture of water. Now, don't you want to go take a bath? Sounds like fun. See you later.